Questions there from the Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle. To welcome our guests for this part of the programme, for the government, Gillian Keegan, the Care Minister, and Luke Pollard for Labour, the Shadow Armed Forces Minister. Laura Kunsberg, the BBC's political editor, is here. It was an interesting line, a careful line, being trodden by Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, in his questions, unsurprisingly, about the reaction to Russian aggression in terms of sanctions, wanting to say very clearly, we support you here on the Labour benches in the actions that you've taken, but we'd like you to go further and we'd like you to do it now and extremely quickly. And the Prime Minister saying we have undertaken this action in terms of putting pressure on Russia, particularly financially. But before we go further, we want to make sure it's a coordinated action with other financial centres in London, Paris and New York. Does that mean there's going to be some delay then?
Well, I think, as you outlined, Joe, Keir Starmer was trying to sort of do consensus with a shove, asking for specifics about what and when might be next and what those triggers might be for what the government and other Western governments have said very openly will be the next successive rounds of sanctions as this situation develops. I think, we have been told privately, and it's been suggested, by some ministers publicly, that things might look at Russian energy companies or whether they'll look at more financial crackdowns. But what was interesting was the Prime Minister said on the record and explicitly there that the government would stop Russian companies clearing dollars and sterling through the City of London. Now, that is not something that was announced yesterday. That it was something that would be a major move. But the government is also, just as Keir Starmer was trying to tread a line, the government's also trying to tread a line because the belief among Western allies is that an element of coordination is really, really important here. And there isn't a point sort of splintering the West. One of the most important things to do is show a unified approach. But of course, the government here has been under attack because some of their sanctions are not as strong as other countries. So, for example, if you think about the number of individuals who've been sanctioned, the EU has targeted many more individuals than the UK has, just 3 individuals. And there are various other sort of comparisons.
What would you say, Gillian, to Tory MPs, many of them on the Conservative benches, former leaders, heads of select committees, who are saying that the government is acting too slowly? We'll come to what Labour has said, and we've heard what Keir Starmer said, but to your colleagues themselves, who are just saying, what is Boris Johnson waiting for?
So you've got to look at the whole context. The first is it is coordinated. It was coordinated in Munich, and it's looking at each country. So what we need to look at this is through the eyes of Russia, what all of these look like through the eyes of Russia and the Russian economy. It is coordinated, and there is an escalating strategy, which is a deliberately escalating strategy. You heard today the next stage of the escalation. But you've also got to put it in context that we have had some restrictions in place for a lot longer than others. So we have 180 individuals, we have 48 companies already.
What impact has that done in terms of deterring Vladimir Putin for taking the action?
Well, it hasn't deterred this action, clearly, because he's in there. But, that was in response to Salisbury and some of the other things. So we have actually already taken moves because of a number of different attacks that we've had. But, of course, it's much more sensible to do a coordinated strategy. Looking at finance and banking is clearly where we can make a big difference, but it does have to be coordinated with other major financial markets.
On that, do you accept that if it is all done as one, it will have a much greater impact? It will cause much more pain to Vladimir Putin. If you're looking at the sorts of things that Keir Starmer was suggesting yesterday in response to his statement, to Boris Johnson's statement, trying to exclude Russia from the main financial mechanisms, you do it as one, it will have more impact.
It certainly would. I think the need for strong action is apparent, because if we are to deter Russian aggression, further invasions into Ukrainian territory, we need to be absolutely strong and robust. And I think the weak and feeble first wave, I don't think matches the strength that many of our allies have done here. So I do want to see Russia excluded from our financial systems. I do want to see us rid dirty money from our politics and from City of London. There are lots of things the government should be doing. They don't have to wait to do it. They could do that today. And that's why the approach that Labour has been taking is to say, we support these measures. We want you to go further. Here are concrete areas where you could go further, where you would enjoy cross-party support. They should get on with that.
All right, well, let's have a look at one of them.
Cross-country support we need. It's actually coordinated. It's not a competition. It's deliberately coordinated. And the escalation strategy is also deliberate.
So was it agreed that we would start with pretty weak sanctions then? Was that part of
What's
the
been
escalation
agreed
strategy?
has all been agreed, and next to things is also part of the escalation strategy, yes.
All right, well, let's have a look.
And then, of course, we've got the longer term, which already, as we talked about, is the economic crime bill as well. So there is a strategy here, and it is an escalating sanctions strategy, coordinated. And you've already heard some signs of what the next stage is.
All right, well, let's have a look at something specific that Keir Starmer suggested yesterday and reiterated today. I'm just going to show everybody this tweet from Stephen Swinford in The Times. Nadine Dorries, the Culture Secretary, has told Ofcom, the regulator, to take timely and transparent action against Russian state-backed broadcaster RT. She's concerned RT will look to spread harmful disinformation. I call on you to ensure actions are timely and transparent to reassure the British public. Should they just be banned right now?
Obviously, politicians should not get involved with that. We have Ofcom as an
Why not?
independent... Because you don't want politicians directing what media you allow within a country.
Well, even in a state of emergency?
No, you want we have robust regulation. Ofcom are doing that. You want them to play their job. It's very important that they're independent. However, there is no doubt, and I believe there's no doubt, that Russia Today is part of Russia's disinformation strategy. And Ofcom, I very much welcome Nadine asking them to review it. I'm sure they were going to anyway with all of this discussion. But they really do need to do that and look specifically at Russia Today.
Luke?
But no, politicians should not ban media.
I'm not a fan of Russia Today. I'm not a fan of Putin's disinformation campaign. It's right that this is reviewed, and I think the language has been carefully chosen there because it needs to be reviewed so it's not open to legal challenge from Russia Today. But Russia Today is one of Putin's elements of spreading misinformation that is so frequently shared in social media feeds, that is designed to split the West, designed to split the consensus that we are trying to build in this country against his aggression. That's why strong measures are required, and I hope this review won't take weeks and months. It should be completed in days.
Would you understand members of the public taking a rather dim view when politicians have appeared in the past, I admit in the past, on Russia Today, both Conservative and Labour politicians?
Yeah, it adds credibility, and having a former politician presenting a show, as was discussed today, is adding, it adds credibility, and from the public's viewpoint, they won't be able to distinguish that.
The problem, though, why previously this has not happened, despite for many years, actually, politicians in this country being concerned about the activities of Russia Today, but particularly acutely right now, is that, as ever, there is the question of being beware of unintended consequences. So were the UK's regulators to take action against Russian broadcasters in the UK, there, of course, could potentially be consequences for British journalists trying to do the right thing and provide journalism to people in other countries, and notably in Russia. And of course, I mean, we would say this, wouldn't we? But the BBC and other United Kingdom media outlets also, are in Russia trying to provide free, fair and impartial coverage. So it's easy for politicians to call for it, but unintended consequences could follow.
And at this point, we'll just say goodbye to viewers from BBC News Channel. Laura, you spoke to Keir Starmer, I mean, it was just a few weeks ago, I think,
about 10 days ago.
on the day that he was in Brussels himself. It was when the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary were there meeting NATO officials, and he restated Labour's commitment to the alliance, and it was unshakable, sort of trying to draw a line between him and his predecessor.
Oh, yes, I don't think he was sort of trying to draw a line. I think he was trying to do a 20-foot banner saying, I'm different to the former bloke. I mean, no question about it. He would try repeatedly, all of the optics of his visit, to go to NATO, to hold a meeting with Jens Stoltenberg, the leader of the Western allies there. I think it was both carefully calculated and calibrated by his team at this moment to show a very distinct difference, and to try to look back in history to say, well, actually, forget about what happened under Jeremy Corbyn. Actually, Labour's always been the party of NATO and was involved in its founding. Right. The difficulty for him is there's still members in the party, still a sprinkling of sitting Labour MPs who are very uncomfortable about it. And for him also, there is the question, and we pressed him on this last week, about if he'd felt that strongly all along, how did he resolve sitting alongside Jeremy Corbyn during those years he was in charge?
Right. What message would you send to Boris Johnson? I think he said 14 members of the Labour Party, Labour MPs, who should have the whip taken away by the party because they see NATO as the aggressor.
Well, NATO's not the aggressor here. We've got a defensive
alliance. But I'm asking what you should say to your colleagues on the Labour benches.
I don't share that view. Neither does Keir. That's not the view that's prevailing in the Labour Party. We have an unshakable commitment to NATO and to supporting our allies. It must be remembered that there is Russian aggression here. It is not NATO that is the aggressor in this situation. NATO presence is defending our allies on the eastern flank, Poland, Lithuania, Estonia and others. They are NATO members. We have an obligation to defend them. them, but we also have an obligation to call out wrongdoing, aggression that Putin is doing. There's 200,000 Russian troops massing on Ukraine. It's not NATO troops there.
So how big a problem is this for the Labour Party when Young Labour, the youth wing of the Labour Party, says NATO's acts of aggression, both historical and present, are a threat to all of our safety? Young Labour's delegates from across our membership and affiliates voted that we should withdraw from NATO and pursue an international policy based on peace, adopting this as official policy. Labour is a broad church, isn't it? Is this difficult?
We are a broad church, but we don't make policy based on Young Labour's tweets. Our commitment to NATO is strong and firm and unshakable. We're not changing that. And at this very moment, when we've got an aggressor threatening the sovereignty and territorial integrity of an ally, of a democratic country, we need to be joining ourselves up to make clear that it is President Putin who is the aggressor here, and we need to support our allies.
Right. Would you like to distance yourself further from the youth wing of the Labour Party?
My grey hair distances me from the youth wing of the Labour Party.
That's a very clever response, but I mean in a broad form.
It is important that you're really clear on this because, you know, we saw it with the last Labour leadership on Salisbury. I mean, he didn't even side with us. He did not even side with his own country. You've got to be crystal clear when you face these insurgencies or these attacks on your own soil. Which side are you on? You've got to be crystal clear. And you were not crystal clear in your last government that you had, shadow government that you had. You've still got elements of this, and it is really important because this is what the country.
At the moment, we need to be showing.
Rely on their government at these moments.
We need to be showing our parties
clear.
together on this, and this is what Keir was saying in PMQs. You know, the Prime Minister couldn't help himself to throw in partisan points, but what we were deliberately showing in the way that Keir asked his questions was that we need to show a united front because in this division,
very much appreciated.
When those type of comments, Gillian, that you just made get chucked in,
but these are important. They're
division.
still here. That's the point of this questioning. There's still an element of this, and you can't have any
those individuals
doubt.
are not in charge of the Labour Party. Keir's in charge of the Labour Party.
They're the next generation.
Keir's in charge of the Labour Party. He has set out clearly that we stand with our allies and we stand with NATO.
All right, well, in terms of whose side are you on, when it comes to these allegations and claims of too much money coming from be it political donations, the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister very clear to say they are all legal and above board and they've all been declared. But money that is washing around the city and the Square Mile, has there been too much going on over the past decade under Conservative governments?
Well, there's been a lot of things that we have done, right? We've set up an economic crime centre. We've obviously had an economic crime plan. We've had the Act in 2017, and then we've got the economic crime bill, which is complicated.
What's the Act in 2017?
The 2017 is the Economic Criminal Finances Act.
But actually, when did Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, actually bring an end to this golden visa scheme, which the government itself has admitted has allowed many Russian oligarchs to continue? It was a scheme started under Labour in 2008 to encourage wealthy people from outside the EU to invest in the UK. But there have been people, I think a couple of hundred people being able to buy their way into the UK. Why wasn't that stopped earlier?
Well, I mean, obviously all these things take time. You've got to make a decision. You weigh these things up. You know, there's something similar to what Laura said before in terms of ramifications, right? You know, if you do something, for example, Russia Today, what do you expect? You then justify a reaction which says, well, you've got rid of all these BBC journalists because they shouldn't be doing this. So you don't want this tit for tat choosing who. You've got to have some good evidence and some good reasons why you say those people with money, no, those
Minister,
not. And we've got to be really, really careful, by the way, not to incriminate Russian people.
Absolutely.
People, and most of the Russian people here have actually fled from this regime.
Minister, are you suggesting that there is not evidence that shows that successive governments in this country have allowed Russian money to swill around the city of
No, I'm
London?
not, and I'm saying more
transparency.
transparency.
That evidence has been there for a long time.
And more transparency needs to be brought forward. I think the economics crime bill is going to be very important. It is complex legislation. You've got the tech element now with cybersecurity and, you know, these partial tokens, etc. So it is more complex, which is why it can't just be done in a few days or a few weeks. So it is complex to get these things right. It's important that the legislation is got right. But we do take it seriously.
All right.
And we've indicated that is what's coming next. And we are absolutely going to bring that economic crimes bill forward.
Let's talk to you about your brief, because we had the head of the NHS Confederation on just before Prime Minister's questions. He wants to know, Matthew Taylor, about whether the government is going to provide free COVID tests to NHS frontline staff and continue to do so beyond April the 1st.
So what we've said is we are now looking at what is the regime that we need to put in place in care homes, in the NHS. So we're working with the scientists now. They want a bit more time, so we've said we will publish that by April the 1st. So that is being worked up, that plan right now.
That doesn't give them much time to plan, does it? So it does mean, as Matthew Taylor was saying very clearly, you could have asymptomatic NHS staff coming into hospitals. They don't want to pay, let's say, £5 per test. They don't feel sick, so they don't feel they have to, and yet they could be spreading infection.
Well, this is what the JCVI, UXA, they're all looking at now.
What's your view, Gillian, as the Care Minister? Do you think that should continue to be free testing for those sectors, NHS frontline staff, visitors?
I'm not going to set the policy when you've got a load of scientists working up what makes sense. I think the most important thing in living with COVID is if you look at the hospitalisations, if you look at the severity of the disease, if you look at the vaccination rates, if you look at actually now, most people are, I mean, I had COVID last week. I didn't have a single symptom.
Yeah.
So, you know, there is now elements, which is what it is we need to do to live with COVID. The therapeutics, the vaccines and the surveillance are the most important pillars. Testing has been a brilliant, fantastic pillar. We have had 2 billion tests in this country, right? Everybody's had loads of them, but they've been absolutely fantastic. But they're not the best pillar for living with COVID. They're not the most, they're not the best way to even to spot what's going on, right? There's a random nature.
No, I mean, we do need to continue with the testing regime because it is a nonsense.
For everybody?
To enable free tests, especially for those in the most vulnerable settings, because I think those people with underlying vulnerabilities have been neglected.
Well, that's what they're looking at.
Out of this
no, they have not been. They have not been neglected at all. They've been the number one focus.
Then what the announcement should have been last week was, and we won't withdraw the free testing from these groups until we've received the scientific evidence. But that wasn't the announcement. The announcement was withdrawing free testing. That was what people heard.
That was a general. No, that was a general
population. That's what people heard because that was what the announcement was.
No.
So we do need to continue this. It can't be forever.
Don't repeat that because I don't want people to think that that's the case. We have said for NHS
but you do agree that that's the broad thrust of what we said, Gillian.
But for adult social care, okay, so I'm the minister responsible, so I know for adult social care that we're waiting for all these people to look at the tests, to look at what they advise based on the work that they're doing. I know that programme of work's going on, so maybe I have an advantage there. But that was always the case, and we are waiting for. And by the way, they have we've been different throughout the general population and care homes quite often.
But Minister, in terms of maintaining the testing regime, weren't there actually very good reasons why your boss at the Department of Health was asking the Treasury for £6 billion to keep the testing regime as it was? And the fact that he lost that battle means that it will be harder for ordinary people to try and do the right thing. You know, tests are going to cost, what, £12 for a pack of 5, a pack of 6? For many, many, many working people, you might feel a bit unwell, but money's tight, inflation's going through the roof. You think, I can't afford to stay off work, I might not be able to afford to go and get a test.
I mean,
that's creating a two-tier system, isn't it?
The Treasury and the Health Service have a lot of discussions, as you know, and which is why we've had tens and tens of billions more in funding from the Treasury all the way through this pandemic.
And you know, on the specifics of this, your department lost out, and that means that the testing regime is being scaled back.
There's always a negotiation, there's always a discussion. Where we've landed, I think, is a good place in terms of what we need to do, but they're working through, you know, what does the surveillance look like?
It's not a good place if you've got a vulnerability, if you're a care home, is it someone with a
vulnerability? You're assuming
about
something
it?
that we haven't yet announced the policy on.
But can you understand people's anxiety then, at the very least?
But we have to let them work through this and tell us, you know, what it won't be the same as it is now, right? So we'll be looking at what makes sense in these settings and what is going to be effective.
But the message has been eroded.
And everything
the confidence has been eroded in this.
Confidence comes from the vaccine. Please be clear about this. Confidence.
So I want people to have the vaccine.
Yeah, it's a different thing.
An important part of this.
Can I just ask Gillian one last question before the end of the programme, which is about the sick pay arrangements, because this also feeds into what is going to be provided by the government. Does there need to be a more generous sick pay, statutory sick pay, when we go to a relative state of normality post-COVID?
Well, I mean, statutory sick pay, from what I understand, is about £96, something like this, per week.
It's about a quarter of what people get in Germany.
And that's on top of other benefits as well, other means-tested benefits, including universal credit, etc. So you can't just take one piece of it, because obviously we have quite a complex system.
We need to
which
fix
moves,
sick pay.
right?
It's clearly broken. It needs to be fixed. If the government's going to be withdrawing large amounts of this, we need to live well with COVID. We need to not ignore it.
You've taken us to the end of the programme. Thank you to all of my guests. I'll be back tomorrow at 12:15. Bye-bye.